Well, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Julia Flanagan and I am the head of Outreach and Events at Northern Slant. We are very excited to be part of this year's Imagine Festival of Ideas in Politics, and our conversation this year is post-pandemic NI, should I stay or should I go? We're asking this question because even as seismic changes forced by Brexit, COVID-19 and technological innovations are shaping Northern Ireland beyond recognition, much of Northern Ireland's political and societal divisions remain stagnant. An emerging generation, often due to economic and career motivations, choose to study, work and live elsewhere. As the world begins to reopen over the coming months, we want to know how we can prevent Northern Ireland becoming a stepping stone. As geographic location becomes less linked to employment opportunities, how can we persuade our people to stay and attract newcomers? As we navigate post-Brexit political and practical realities, how can our political and civil society leaders build a truly shared future? I'm very excited to introduce our excellent panel of commentators as we consider how together we can make Northern Ireland a more attractive and inclusive place for everyone. So I would like to welcome Ailbhe Rea. Ailbhe is from Belfast and is now living in London. She is a political correspondent of the New Statesman and co-host of the New Statesman podcast. We're also joined by Lainey Lennox. Lainey is originally from the great state of Louisiana, USA. She has a master's in conflict transformation and social justice from Queen's University and is currently a PhD candidate at Ulster University. Tina McKenzie, welcome. Tina is the CEO of Staffline Ireland and the chair of the NI Policy Forum for the Federation of Small Businesses Northern Ireland. And we're also joined by Charmaine Jones. Charmaine is the Community Relations Officer for Cohesion, Sharing and Integration at the Rural Community Network. Welcome everyone and thank you so much for being here. So I just want to start maybe by asking you first, Lainey, as someone who's come to Northern Ireland, you first came to Belfast in 2013. Around 8 years later, you're still here. What was it that drew you to Northern Ireland and how long did you think that you were actually going to stay when you first came here?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know anything about Northern Ireland or Belfast before I came. I didn't even know that the island was partitioned. It's not something we really learn about in school, you know, and I'm 28, so I didn't really grow up with it being on the news, at least kind of, you know, in my sort of that I was conscious of. So I've been a peace and conflict researcher since I was an undergraduate. So when I first came here, I came on a semester abroad as an undergraduate, and honestly, you know, they basically told me at my undergraduate university, for good kind of conflict research, you should go to the Balkans, South Africa, or to Northern Ireland. And I picked Northern Ireland with, again, didn't really know anything about it. I just kind of thought, well, you know, it'll be nice to spend some time there and then maybe like see some more of Europe on there. And, you know, I thought I was only going to be here for that semester. So really just 6 months. And then, yeah, just have kept coming back for, as you said, the past, I guess, 8 years now, which is crazy to think about. It's been a long time.
And Ailbhe, you've had the opposite experience. You know, you were born and raised here in Northern Ireland, but you chose to move away. Was this because of your chosen career path? Could anything have persuaded you to stay here in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, I feel like I never really made a choice to leave. And in a way, when I saw that you were planning on asking that question, I was thinking, in a way, I still don't feel like I ever made a choice to move away, or that I've chosen to live in England, even though I've now been here for about 8 years. And I suppose that's because I suppose the 2 points where people move away or decide to stay in Northern Ireland are when you go away to university or stay. And then after you graduate, where you get a job. I think that my experience is the same as for lots of people. It was just that I had applied to go to university in England, and so many people that I went to school with moved away for university, either to the Republic or England or Scotland or Wales, and a few further afield. And so I just made that decision. It didn't really feel like a decision to move away. It was just sort of, if you aren't going to go to Queen's, and especially if you're from Belfast and you've been walking past Queen's your whole life, if you're not going to go to Queen's or Ulster, then you just end up picking somewhere else. And it just seems like a kind of normal Northern Irish choice that people make, and it doesn't feel necessarily like moving away. So before you know it, you've been away for at least 3 years. My course was 4 years. And then at the point where you graduate, I think if you're at an English university, I did move home after my degree because I hadn't got a job lined up the second I left. Then you're just applying for jobs everywhere. And I think at that point, it really was just a question of where I got offered a job first. And it happened to be, well, I suppose at that point, I didn't know what opportunities there were going to be in Belfast, and I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And I sort of decided to try my luck and move to London for a little bit. And again, that didn't feel like a permanent choice, but I just thought if I go to London and try to get as much experience as I can, that'll put me in a good footing wherever I go or whatever I do. And then, I mean, that was only a few years ago. It feels like that was yesterday. So I'm still here and I have a permanent job in London. But I think that's how it works for so many people, because I know from, I've got so many friends from Belfast here in London, and I feel like none of us feel like we're here permanently necessarily. We always talk about whether we'd move back, and we still have some friends at home who have jobs there. So I think that's how it works. And before you know it, I'm sure people who are much older than me feel like they've been away from Belfast for 40 years and they never made the choice to leave. And they still aren't necessarily sure if they'll be there forever. And I know that will probably change if I start putting down roots or something. But I think that, for me, it was never really a choice to leave Northern Ireland. It just sort of happened because I suppose it's a small place with 2 options for universities, and then job opportunities have kept me away.
Yeah. Well, I suppose then that brings us really into the question, Tina, around what's Northern Ireland's pulling power. Your life's work has been around assisting people into work and advising businesses. And as Alva just discussed there, in Northern Ireland, we have that reputation for losing people either at that stage of university to go across the water or when they graduate. What is it about Northern Ireland that should encourage people to build a life here rather than somewhere else? And what are the incentives for people? And how has the combination of Brexit and now the pandemic affected that calculation that people will do in their heads before making a decision like that?
Well, I think many years ago, people had to leave for opportunities, and we weren't talking about careers. We were simply talking about people getting jobs at that stage. However, the economy is developed and post, especially the Good Friday Agreement period, we've built a much bigger and stronger private sector. And actually the amount of people employed by the public sector is decreasing. And that many years ago was one of the only places you could get a secure job. So we're seeing a much more balanced economy. But for me, I think that as you get a bit, and I'm a bit older than Lainey, and I hope I'm saying right, Ilba?
Alva, yeah.
Alva, yeah. And maybe even Charmaine as well. I might be a bit older than you all.
I would question that maybe.
I think what happens when you, for example, start a family, and I lived in London, had a wonderful time, you can make much more money than you can in Northern Ireland. However, what you realize after a few years is you also spend much more money because it's much more expensive. So you're not necessarily getting any further, but there's certainly more opportunities for you, especially if you're a young graduate. And my advice would be to people, even my own daughter's gone to Edinburgh University, is to get out, get traveling, get your opportunities. But I think depending on your situation, I know whenever I was pregnant with my first daughter in London, I knew I didn't really want to have her in London. I wanted to come home, get a big family network. Also, it's much easier to have a family in Northern Ireland and have a quality of life that you maybe necessarily can't have in some of these other bigger cities. House prices are much, much cheaper. And also, we're surrounded by beautiful scenery and we're not very heavily populated. So, when you're looking at lifestyles, also we know that the education system here now, not the whole education system, but, the education system that facilitates grammar schools, children going off to university, it's very strong in Northern Ireland, and we're not swamped by private schools like we were in London because people had to pay to get a good education. So there's lots of reasons why people come back home. It could be family, it could be starting a family, or it could be you eventually want to buy a home, a house. And there's no chance you're doing that in London unless you're on probably 500,000 or something to actually get a house in central London. So I think there's Northern Ireland through COVID has had a really tough time. And when I look at the amount of people that are economically inactive, we're like a have and have not society here. You know, we have a huge amount of people that are economically inactive, and we've also got a huge amount of people that are only up to skills level 2. And when we look at what we need in the economy, we need much more skills level 3, 4, 5, and sometimes 6 in order to feed what's going to create the business growth. So we've definitely got a mismatch in skills. So we definitely want our talent to come home. But in order to get our talent to come home, we've got to create a place that is attractive for people coming back, settling and living here. And unfortunately, we still have very negative parts of our society in the fact that, you know, we haven't moved on very far when we look at how liberal we are compared to the Republic of Ireland and the rest of GB. And when you live in GB for years and you come home, you realize, you think, oh my goodness, it is much more cosmopolitan, it's much more liberal. You know, we are still a little bit back in the decades in terms of, you know, women's rights, etc. So I think that we've got a lot of work to do in the economy. COVID has certainly not helped us. We have more people employed here in small business, more employees than the whole of big business and the public sector put together. So we're quite entrepreneurial, but we've got to foster that back because small businesses have been really badly affected. But I think more than any of that, we've got to create a place where there's hope and where there is a society that actually respects their neighbour, irrespective of who that neighbour is. And there's still, there's high degrees of racism in certain parts of Northern Ireland. And we also see then still a lot of sectarianism. And for young people, especially young people who are starting their careers, they don't need to put up with that. And if they're starting a family, they may not want to bring their children up in that environment. Why should they? When other big cities and other countries are calling for our young people to come because they have the skills and the education that they need to grow. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. I mean, Charmaine, sort of your experience working within the rural communities, I mean, you know, we were discussing that the pandemic has forced many of us to change our working patterns, with more of us working remotely from home. As a result, in rural areas, you know, people are commuting less into the cities. I mean, we're also hearing more about how people from around the world are choosing to leave some cities altogether because they have that flexibility and they have those arrangements in place. Do you think that this is something that we can see more of in Northern Ireland? And, you know, as we consider the incentives for people to stay here, what do you think are the investment and economic opportunities for our rural towns and villages post-pandemic?
I really do reiterate what Tina has said in relation to all the issues that she's spoken about. And I suppose for the work that we would do and the changes that we have seen, particularly during the pandemic, we always would say that rural has not got a fair share. And in terms of has and has not, it's been urban versus rural. So, and that's always something that RCN has championed for, not only for community development, community relations work, but also the economy and small business and and agriculture. But I really do think that during this pandemic, there really has been a stark difference in the digital divide, and that really has come forward during the pandemic. Thankfully, we have a strong rural infrastructure. We have rural support networks. We have Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network. We have RCN. So there's really good organisations there that have been the backbone to rural communities throughout Northern Ireland. But even the fact when it comes to homeschooling, working from home, small businesses being now run from home, the digital divide has never been so the gap has never been so big. And where, like, even our own staff living in a rural area, I live in a town, so my broadband speed is excellent compared to the staff that we would have working in a rural setting as well. So, you know, we've had to really champion for, you know, to get funders to give tablets and iPads and help with mobile phone networks, work with funders to support rural areas. Where there has been that digital divide, because rural isolation is something that we have really seen grow in the pandemic, and mental health in rural areas because of what Tina was talking about, the physical geography of this place that we live in, and that people have felt disconnected. And particularly in the work that we would do, when a lot of our work was all front facing and maybe only 5% of it was virtually, and was online. Now 100% of our work has had to be virtually and not face to face. So we have had to change our practices in terms of how we work with people in the rural community. But then we have to try and make sure those rural communities also have access to the right broadband, mobile phone networks and all the infrastructure around that, so that they can also thrive in the middle of a global pandemic. And RCN and our director, Kate Clifford, has been very much at the forefront of the 5G project, where, you know, in the last year, there's been an 18 partner consortium has come together about trying to enhance and transform rural communities, because I think the way forward is going to be more working from home. There's been a lot of surveys carried out around small business and around community development organizations about, you know, do you want to go back to the new normal, or which was go back to your office 5 days a week, or do you see yourself 2 days a week and 3 days, you know, at home? And I think society has changed, that we've got used to that virtual space as well as the physical space. So the infrastructure in rural needs to be right for that. And there's, I think, recently 165 million of broadband was put into place to try and, you know, enhance 76,000 homes in Northern Ireland. So that's a really good start, but we need to make sure that we also look at the people who still won't have that access in a year's time or in 4 years' time, because they still will have to, you know, use broadband and use digital devices to keep themselves connected. So that's really, I suppose, in terms of where rural communities are at, is that connectivity between people, and it's been really hard to try and do that. But RCN has really been pushing to make sure that rural people stay connected, not only to their own communities, but also their support networks, to improve, you know, their own mental and physical health as well. So it's just been, rural has also got, you know, whenever we talk about small businesses, rural also has got a hard time with the global pandemic as well. It already was struggling in some areas, and the pandemic has just enhanced that going forward, really.
Yeah. Tina, I mean, last week we saw, just talking there about more people working from home, Hughes Insurance announced last week that they would be moving to a remote working policy permanently. Will we see, or are we starting to see trends with other companies and businesses in the cities, and what will that mean for the local economies in the cities?
Well, what we're hearing from companies right across the UK is that they're talking about much more blended working. We're not actually hearing, like the Hughes announcement, they can do it because it's more contact center environments. As long as you're at home, set up getting the calls on the computer and you've got your headset, it's straightforward enough. But for a lot of working environments, especially a lot of young people that work for us, they want to be back in the offices. They miss the social interaction. They also sometimes don't have anywhere to work. I know for a lot of mums, it's been a struggle trying to keep to a space that, you know, with kids running in, dogs running in, you know, and everybody, especially those with caring responsibilities as well. Not everyone's set up with an office from home. People are sitting on the corners of their bed. And so a lot of people want to go to the office environment, and they want to distinguish what is the work environment from their home environment. And I think that's pretty, it's pretty important to do that. So this idea that everyone's going to go now working from home and companies are going to start ending their leases, I don't expect to see that at all. I mean, I have offices in every big town in Ireland, and I'm not cancelling any of my leases, because I know that the people that work for me in those offices, actually being together and cross-selling and being a team is really at the heart of how they're successful. And remember, also a lot of companies have leases that are 5 and 10 years. So no one expected the pandemic to be coming. Now, if you're in a lucky position where your lease is up, fantastic. But most people are in long-term leases, and even when their lease is up, they've got to spend a lot of money in getting out of them in terms of refurbing back to the way it was when you first went in. So it's not going to be a panacea of everybody working from home, and neither should it be, because it isn't necessarily the best thing for all people. However, most employers will be more flexible. They've realized that people working from home can be trusted. They are just as productive, if not sometimes more productive. Mm-hmm. It saves the commute, and people are willing to give more because there's flexibility for them. So I think you'll see a mix, and I think our city centres will be much more about those open spaces where we have to create reasons for people to go into those areas, because we've seen for decades the decimation of the high street, and that's just continuing. So councils, and you've seen it with Belfast City Council recently, they are coming up with ideas and strategies around how to make better city centres and also bring more people to live in the city centres again. So although we're saying people want to move out, get gardens, get more space, actually a lot of people, because there'll be more space in the city centres, if they're nicer areas, a lot of people will be happy to move into the city centres and live there. So I think there's lots it's going to be interesting. I think lots going on. I wouldn't expect to see anything like wide scale for the next 2 to 3 years, but in 10 years time, who knows? I think things are changing really rapidly, especially when we look at the 5G network and all of that. There's a lot of work to be done to get us connected, especially in this place, you know. So I think that maybe in a decade, different story, but we'll see slight changes going along over the next few years.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, Alva talked about universities there as well. I mean, the two universities are in the Belfast area. Well, you know, the two, I suppose, most popular. I mean, is there opportunities there to develop sort of education outside of Belfast? And if so, what are they? Yeah, I'll open that up to anybody who wants to answer it.
I'll let someone else jump in.
I suppose I'm just thinking about outside Belfast, the recent investments has more been in the lines of the fire services and the likes of the agricultural colleges in Cookstown and places like that where I work. And then you have McGee College, which has just had a massive, with the new money that's just been released recently, which is an investment in the Northwest, and I think that has to be welcomed, particularly for employment in the Northwest. So I do think there are opportunities for further education, you know, outside of Belfast. I went to Ulster University. For me, living in a rural town, it was like light years away from what I was used to, because Belfast was the big smoke. But I do think people are starting to see that, you know, where there are areas of deprivation or there are areas of high employment, that also poverty, education is a way out of poverty. And I think if you really do, you know, support the infrastructure in that local area, then, you know, there's the opportunities and people will stay. And I've always stayed in Northern Ireland. I'm the only person here actually who has never moved away and never lived away and always kept close to home. But in saying that, the opportunities for me as a young person coming out of a working class area and then moving up the ladder and moving and meeting other people from different communities and different backgrounds, I think education's one tool to that, but it's not the sum of all parts. And employment and working for small businesses opens up opportunities again. So I do think that there are plenty of opportunities in Northern Ireland as well, and there is a chance to thrive here too. I think sometimes we are always so closed in that we think if it doesn't happen in Belfast, it doesn't happen at all. And I work in all parts of Northern Ireland, and what you hear and what you see from small enterprises, social entrepreneurs, community workers, there's a thriving network of expertise here too. And I do think west of the Ban certainly needs more input and more resourcing to support people, you know, west of the Ban. And that's where we also would see a big divide in Belfast. And thank goodness now the Northwest is getting a significant investment too.
Yeah.
There's definitely a perception, and Charmaine touches on it nicely there, that there isn't opportunity in Northern Ireland. Yeah. I came home, had kids, and when my career developed again and I was pulled back again, living in London, having a flat in London, living in Wales, believe it or not. And then my next job was in Amsterdam, and I was flying back and forward from Cardiff and London. The perception that there isn't opportunities in Northern Ireland is wrong. And when I came back my second time, I went to see a headhunter, and she said to me, I was running a national company from London, and she said to me, "Are you mad? You're never going to get a big job like that here. You're never going to get a salary like that here." And when I went to see my mother, she said, "What do you mean you've left your big job? They thought this was the big job, and why would you be coming home?" And at that stage, I started a company here from nothing. And it became the biggest recruitment company in Northern Ireland, bought the biggest competitors. And I think if you have the will, the drive, the skill and support structures and good people around you, you can do it in Northern Ireland just as easy as you can do it anywhere. And in fact, if you've got that support around you, you're going to achieve more. And so this perception that there's not a lot here, I have hundreds, thousands of jobs, vacancies on our books. And although it's COVID and the pandemic and there's Brexit and the protocol and all the issues, sometimes all we hear is the issues. And so Charmaine puts it nicely. There's lots of good stuff, and lots of people have stayed here and done brilliantly well and have been lucky enough to be close to their families all that time, where a lot of us have had to sacrifice that for our careers.
Yeah, and I think Tina as well, you know, I was brought up during the Troubles. I lived in an interface area, so the opportunities for me as a younger child were very closed in and minutiae, and you never really got a chance to meet other people. And just because of community safety and your background, you kept your sort of self tight, and that was just to keep yourself safe. And then I think as you progress, you get more educated, get your qualifications, go to university, and then the door is open to you in terms of the diversity of Northern Ireland. I always am a big advocate for where we live, and there's many a person's got us to speak as well about what opportunities are here and how internationally people can learn from us as well. And I don't always think, you know, it hasn't to be a glass half empty all the time. There's a mindset within Northern Ireland that everything is issue-based and bad. And I think even in terms of the work that I do, I bring passion to my work, but I also try to bring hope and say to people, you know, that I'm working with, yes, you may be isolated, you may have mental health issues, there may be a legacy issue here from the past, but you need to bring that hope with you. And I think for coronavirus on top of that, it's been very, very difficult because it's hard for people to see hope when they can't see light at the end of the tunnel. So, you know, coronavirus has been another layer on top of all of that as well. So you really do have to bring hope to people in Northern Ireland that things will get better and that their situation here is just the same as anywhere else, but that there's opportunities for you to progress and to do well. And I think particularly with young people, you need to, you know, as a youth worker for a while, and you really do need to instill in young people in Northern Ireland that there are good things out there for them, that they don't have to hop on a plane and go thousands of miles away to do well.
Yeah, well, I mean, Leonie, is there anything that we could probably learn from your home country in terms of sort of our mindset or things like that? Is there anything you could share, any perspectives that you would have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say I would necessarily attribute my perspective to my home country per se, because to be honest, like I kind of more or less came of age in certain ways here because I've lived here for most of my 20s. So I think, you know, a lot of my perspective as an adult was kind of based on living here, really. But I think just in terms of kind of the perspective I would have and how I think about Northern Ireland and how it might transform going forward is thinking about, you know, I know we've been talking a lot about economic opportunity, which is of course very important, but I think it's also important to talk about kind of the other parts of life. Of course, again, not at all belittling that economic opportunity is extremely necessary and important, but thinking about kind of community building and kind of the different ways that can happen in an inclusive way. And I know Tina touched on a little bit, you know, kind of wanting to live in a place where you love your neighbor, whoever that is, and touched on some of the issues of racism here as well. And I think it's really important to kind of keep all of that in mind and to think really creatively about how communities can be built. Like, for example, I was speaking to actually for a Northern Slant podcast that will come out hopefully in a couple weeks time, was speaking to someone from the 343, which is like a queer community space, that talking to them about a mutual aid project that they've run throughout the pandemic. And I think that's kind of this really interesting. So, you know, mutual aid is this idea of kind of like a horizontal way of providing financial aid to people that need it. And I think it's a really, like, if we think about community building kind of through things like that, I think that can be very interesting, and, you know, and a way to both kind of address the issues of this place head on, but also transform them through addressing people's needs, and kind of building community through those kind of activities. Yeah.
And so it just came into my head there, because Alva, you wrote a really good piece last year for the New Statesman. It was the early days of the pandemic, and you were talking about sort of missing home, and it was something that really resonated, I think, with a lot of people. Well, it would resonate with a lot of people that were living away from home at that time. But sort of you know, looking, I mean, would you want to come back? I mean, what would draw you back to Northern Ireland if the opportunity did arise?
Yeah, well, so I'm completely on board with what Tina and Charmaine were saying about all the opportunities in Northern Ireland and what a great place it is to live. A lot of what Tina was saying in her first answer really, really resonated with me, because, you know, I was saying that I have lots and lots of friends from Belfast here in London, and we always talk about whether we would move home and what would bring us back. And I think that we're so conscious of all of the great things about living in Northern Ireland compared with a place like London. I mean, like literally being able to buy a house is a really obvious one. But really, but even if it isn't London, the way I think, especially, I suppose it's a class dimension to this, that like the middle classes in Northern Ireland have a very comfortable life in general, that if you earn a comfortable living in Northern Ireland, you're likely to have a bigger house than you'd be able to get in most parts of England, a really nice garden, you're able to, you know, you've got nice restaurants, there's a decent cultural scene in lots of parts of Northern Ireland, particularly Belfast and Derry. And then you know, you can like drive to the beach or go to the Mourns, you can go over Cave Hill, like it's a really beautiful part of the world, as well as the appeal, if you're Northern Irish, that you're near your family and so on. So I think that actually people my age are already kind of sold on those things. Everyone knows that that's why they would want to go home and the kind of life that would be available to them. So I think for me, this is kind of where the economic stuff that we were talking about and then the community stuff that Lainey was talking about kind of converge, is that I'm obviously in political journalism in London. And so I think a lot about the political culture in Northern Ireland and what it would be like to be a political journalist in Belfast. And during the general election, I reported a little bit from Northern Ireland, but apart from that, I'm you know, based in Westminster. And I think that it's our public life that is the driver of all the things that Tina was talking about how Northern Ireland is a less liberal country in general than the rest of the UK and also than the Republic now. And the interesting thing about people kind of squarely in my demographic, so sort of younger people who have moved away, is that when we talk about, you know, without making it too political, when we talk about the possibility of a border poll, you know, we know that with changing demographics in Northern Ireland, the sort of the unaligned middle is the big growing demographic. And so it is people broadly like me, so younger people who grew up in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement, who for various reasons, so in my case, my dad's Protestant, my mum's Catholic, like you know, people who didn't grow up with as fixed an identity, who've moved around a bit, who haven't been forced to choose on those kinds of issues, they tend to have the political values that we were talking about. There's lots of interesting research into them, and it also isn't just younger people. There's lots of research that unaligned middle includes a lot of middle class Protestant women, for quite interesting reasons. But you know, there are lots of younger people. So for example, I don't think my gay friends would want to move back to Northern Ireland when even if there is progress on equal marriage, I think the attitudes are not as progressed as they are in other parts of the UK or in the Republic. It's those kinds of things that I think mean that if you are looking at opportunities in politics or in journalism, it's a little bit harder. So certainly I think for me as a journalist, it was when Lyra McKee died that I could really see that, I think in a way for the first time, that there still are plenty of Northern Irish journalists doing really interesting, really brave work. I've always been aware of the most prominent ones, but you could see younger people. She was the ultimate example of a Northern Irish person who was young and queer and progressive and trying to push that agenda. And I think I know I had conversations with lots of journalist friends who were Northern Irish talking about feeling this, you know, thinking about the possibility of moving back to do more interesting journalism from Northern Ireland, but it is, I suppose, a bit of a risk, especially when it converges with that political culture, because there are parts of that are still incredibly intimidating, and that's not something that you would have to face, you know, if you're doing Westminster journalism. It's a completely different thing. And it's the same in politics. So I think some political parties are better than others at attracting talent who have moved to England or Scotland, or who've had careers in Dublin. Some of them are better at drawing them back to Stormont than others. And so, you know, there's like Matthew O'Toole, who's an SDLP MLA, used to work in Downing Street. Yeah. And I think the SDLP has, you know, I'm not sort of saying that for any political reasons, but just in terms of drawing on talent from different parts of, from people who were born in Northern Ireland who've moved away. The SDLP makes a bit of an effort to say, well, you're in Downing Street, but come back and be based in Stormont. A lot of SDLP advisors, you know, worked in political communications in Dublin, and they've been sort of drawn back. And you can see it, you know, with some political parties more than others. Sinn Féin also has, you know, recruits from sort of, you know, there's previously a London journalist who now works for Sinn Féin. You know, I think some political parties, it's not really a function of their politics, but some are just a bit more conscious of trying to draw the talent in. But I think it's the broader political question of which political parties are really representing the views of younger progressive people, which are sort of absorbing that into their politics. There's been a lot of coverage of a crisis in unionism. There's been sort of interesting coverage. I think there was a piece in the newsletter not that long ago that said, you know, the problem with unionism is unionists, because there are lots and lots of people who are in favour of the union, but who don't have the sort of the social politics of some unionist politicians. And so those kinds of people don't have a political home at the moment. And I think it's when that broader public life changes, when I think there are more opportunities within journalism, and maybe when a space opens up more in our politics for those kinds of views, that people will find themselves attracted to it. But I think maybe it also requires more people to be like Tina, in that Tina came back and started her own business, and like plainly there's so much talent in Northern Ireland, but it's maybe a question of more people choosing to come back and invest their time and start something new in Belfast or further afield. You know, there are local journalism is shrinking rather than expanding, which is bad for you know, communities and societies everywhere. And I think that's a problem. And it maybe will take people moving back to fix it. So now I've kind of convinced myself that at some stage I need to go back to Belfast and become a journalist.
As you talk, I'm just thinking the Sunday Business, we have vacancies for journalists, you know. The Sunday Business Post is moving vacancies to the north, and they're looking for some Northern Irish political journalists. So don't write it off. Call me if you need a job.
There you go. There you
Tina,
go.
I mean, looking at it through the lens of business and recruitment, I mean, what can our political and civil society leaders do, and, you know, to move things forward and build that shared future that we're talking about? I mean, what are the challenges? How can we overcome them through the lens of business?
Well, I think business is a great example of how to bring people together. I remember, like Charmaine, I grew up in one side of the fence, a very Republican area. And I remember going to college was the first time I ever really had Protestant friends. You know, and when I used to tell people that in London, they thought I'd lost. They were like, yeah, right, dead on. They really didn't believe you. And I married an Englishman, so when he came back and had to live here, he then understood it. But I think I just remember looking back, and I had an office full of consultants in Belfast, and I knew all of their backgrounds. I didn't share it with each other necessarily, but I certainly knew some of their families' backgrounds, their backgrounds. And sitting in that little office in Bradbury Place was such a diversity of experience. And I was really proud that here these people were working together, making friends together. Most of us, when we go off to college and university, we will meet people from different areas. But if you're not going off to college and university, you're going into the workplace. And I think what we have to do in society here is really look to all of those workplaces where we all work brilliantly together. You know, you don't often hear too much about sectarian workplaces. They still happen, but nowhere near the way they used to happen in the 70s and 80s. So we have workplaces where people can work together, they like each other, they become friends, you know, they get involved in each other's families, and religion and background isn't a problem in those environments where they build up those trusted relationships on a secure base. And I think when we look at, and I'm sure, Lainey, you've done this in your studies, because when you look at the housing in Northern Ireland, still over 70% segregated and mostly working class. It's all right for the middle classes living on Malone Road or in Belmont, or, you know what I mean? That it's all a different story then. But, and then we look at our children and say, okay, well, over 90% are still in segregated education. And then we look at our political system and we say, okay, that we're in these forced kind of coalition mandatory governments, which don't work effectively. Yet it's the only way to get those politicians to work together. And all of those things make for a recipe of that we're not going to be as effective at bringing people together as we should be, based on the fact that we are a post-conflict society and we've got a lot of work to do. Now, when people get out of this place, there's nothing better sometimes than going somewhere where nobody really cares what your name is, what street you grew up in, or who your family are, or anything else. You're your own person, you build your own reputation. And I know even Lainey coming from America, there's also a sense of when you come out of living in the States, it's fresh air, it's a new country, it's a new beginning. You can be whatever you want to be, I guess, I hope anyway. And you're looking in at other people's. Now, I worked quite a lot in the States, and the thing I noticed, the big difference and why I loved it, and there's a lot of problems in the States as well, of course, but the reason I really loved it was that idea that if you're successful and ambitious, that's brilliant. And look at how well you've done. Oh, wow. Whereas over here, if you think you're getting a bit too big for your boots and you think you are somebody, well, somebody's going to tell you quite quickly that you're not. And it may even be a newsletter journalist in my case, but that's another story. So, you know, you're very quickly put back in your box here. And I think for us that we've got to have some revolutionary, believe it or not, revolutionary structural change in our society. And I don't think we can expect to attract talent to those big political parties when they're forced into the situations they're forced into. And I know that we're still evolving, but I think we've got a lot of growing and changing to do in order to facilitate, accommodate the young people that deserve it here, actually. And there are a lot of old people that should just walk off the stage and give the young people a chance, because they're more open. You know, they've certainly got, I think, a better view on things about what's going on in society, what can we look for in the future, the green economy, looking for, you know, as Lainey had said, about those other things in society that really matter. And, you know, if we want to get people like Alva back, we've got to have a better society, not just a better economy. But don't forget, there are brilliant things about here. And that's why I'm back, you know, for people who can live anywhere. You know, this is still a brilliant place to live. And especially, you know, you saw the event down in, I think it was Donegal Road, where there was a synagogue that was burned down. You probably heard about that.
Yeah.
They just, and you know, within 5 hours of Patrick, you'll know his Patrick's surname from Patrick.
Was it the Belfast Migrant Centre? Is that the?
It was.
Yes,
it was.
Yes. They raised over, I think, 50,000, wasn't it?
Within about 5 hours.
Yeah.
And you see a real humanity here. You know, we all heard about Noah and what happened to young Noah. And you see people come together 6:10 every Sunday night to recognize that there's a mother without her son. And then, you know, you look at sports and you look at Carl, the boxer, and everybody comes together. And they're great when they come together. And it's just this old hangover, his history, but also the structural ambition that we need to change. And the last thing I'll probably say about that is that we have gone to the politicians. And remember, I was one of the founders of MI21. So I was one of those ones that even tried to start a new political party, you know, because it was fresh politics, which crashed and burned. But, you know, we go to the politicians and we say, you know, Northern Ireland could be an enhanced economic zone. So we can sell to the UK and we can sell across Europe. We could be a free port. And all we got was all the things that are wrong with that. And that we couldn't get people to see what could be right about that. Corporation tax, not just about giving more money back to companies, it's about levelling us up with the Republic of Ireland. Why are they getting 15 times more investment than we are? Because of our tax system and also because of our reputation and of instability politically. So there's so much more that we can be doing, but we've got to push these politicians. We've got to change the systems. And the best people to do that are the young people who don't carry the baggage the way older people do, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think, you know, young people are not, those future generations coming up are not affected by the past, that, you know, they didn't live the past in the way that maybe, you know, my parents' generation did. So I think there is hope in that sense. Charmaine, just from a community relations point of view, as somebody who works day to day with various communities across the political divide, what do you think are the opportunities there for civil leaders and political leaders?
I think really, like the pandemic has breeded fear that already existed within communities. So I was always brought up with a mindset of fear about what the other might do to you or your family or your community. So the pandemic was an unknown virus, an unknown enemy that came at the same time. And I think really, you know, with fear and human behavior go hand in hand about how people actually enact on fear. And I think really during the pandemic, for us as a community relations organization, for my work, where we're talking about the middle ground and those that would have been able to come and have some sort of accommodation, I think over the last year, and particularly in the last few months, any issue has become a for and against, and right on the far ends of the extreme. And whenever people are not having any social contact with each other, everything's virtual. You're not in a physical space that you can look someone in the eye and have that relationship eye to eye and have good dialogue with that person. Try to walk in their shoes and walk in their journey. When you're trying to do that online, that's been very, very difficult. And I think people have either opted in for that or people have opted out and decided that they don't even want to engage at that level. So you have no real space at the minute, I feel, for accommodation or discussion or dialogue around all of these different issues that are affecting us during the pandemic. And I'm not even just talking about the orange and green stuff, but there's so much about the border, culture, identity, then the abortion, you know, yesterday, LGBTQ issues, and then we have the centenary this year, or the commemoration or the marking on. There's so many different ways that people are talking about the birth of a state or the partition of an island. And this is all happening in the middle of a global pandemic as well. And I really do feel, you know, that we've come, so like looking at the freedom of speech versus your freedom of opinion, and where does that all sit in the middle of a global pandemic when we haven't really had any personal contact with each other? And you go right back to the basic contact theory, and I know it's at that lowest level, but you know, we haven't been able to do that. And thankfully in Rural Community Network, we have really tried to be creative about bringing people into that space to try and have those conversations and that dialogue. And it's been hard work to do that and to keep people on that good relations thought and train, because in the middle of the global pandemic, you've had, you know, health, you've education, you've been homeschooling, you have your job, you've been furloughed, you're self-employed, you've lost your business, you're trying to keep your business, you're trying to keep your farm or whatever else you're doing. And then I'm asking you on top of that to get involved in peace building work. And that in itself is a journey. So the pandemic has brought, you know, has made my work a lot more difficult, but it's not saying that it hasn't continued, but it very much has continued. But I think government need to take responsibility for also creating that civic space. And I know that there's a shared island dialogue started with the Irish government. We do have the Centre for Cross-Border Studies and their ad hoc North, South, East, West committee trying to get conversations going that do impact everybody on not only this island, but also on the mainland as well, and Stormont and the UK government. And I think we just need to create spaces now where people can feel comfortable, that they're not going to feel they're going to offend anybody, because this culture of everybody feeling offended, and then nobody wants to say anything about anything. And then when you have a culture like that, then the far extremes go even farther away from each other. So we're really trying to think through about how we work through the pandemic and create those spaces. And really, for us, the last year has been about us learning how to have that conversation online when we don't know what the future looks like and we don't know how long the pandemic's going to last. And if you leave a void there too long, then the gap will be filled with fear or suspicion or contempt. And in the last few months, really from Christmas, we're very keen to get communities to engage again on those meatier issues that are affecting their daily lives around their identity, their culture, and peace building as well. Because as Tina said, we can't forget the Good Friday Agreement's 23 years now down the line. It's on rocky ground and the sands are shifting every second of every day. And I'm even finding as a good relations officer, so difficult to keep up with what is the issue today. What was the issue in the next hour? Everything is changing so quickly and the environment is changing so quickly that I just think we need to be, now's the time for us to try and think about where can that safe space be that we can start to have these conversations that are affecting all our lives on this island. I still don't have the answer to that, but I know that I'm up for any conversations that there would be. And I think the University of Liverpool is starting to encourage people to come forward with pro-unity and pro-union conversations. And you have Ireland's Future, which is a new initiative that's just started as well. And you have We Make NI, which is a new Twitter organisation and a Facebook group who are trying to get all these different conversations all starting at the minute. So I think that's where we're at. But nobody can see the future and nobody can predict where we might be in a year's time. So I think we just have to, stick at it as best as we can. And, rural communities, I've been very privileged to work with rural communities. The resilience that I've seen during the pandemic has been second to none. It's actually made me so proud of where we live. The rural communities were the first people to enact. As soon as the pandemic hit, they were straight out with little to no resource and helping the most vulnerable in their society. And we collected so many stories during this pandemic that just would made you so proud, as Tina said, of when times were really tough, no matter what colour, nor creed, nor religion, or political view, people rallied round, particularly in a rural community, and said, I'm here to help you. And I think that's something that we should never forget coming out of this pandemic, that people were willing to help each other.
Absolutely. And Lainey, as somebody who has come to Northern, how have you observed our society evolve since you've been here? What improvements have you seen and what frustrations have you seen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, sometimes I do think a lot about how, because as you said, I've been here off and on. Now, I haven't been here for 8 years straight, but I've been here, I guess, off and on for 8 years. And so it's difficult for me to know sometimes if how much is me perceiving this change that has actually happened and how much of it is sort of just me getting to know the place better. So I think in terms of the way things have transformed, I've definitely seen a lot of development in certain areas. So, like the Orma Road, for example, has changed like drastically since I kind of first knew it 8 years ago in different parts of South Belfast. And I guess that kind of feeds into also what I feel frustrated by about the place a lot of the times, because, there is a lot of development in certain areas and really very, very little in others. And kind of as a person, I currently, as of today, actually, because I just moved to live in North Belfast and have also worked in North Belfast. And, you do see, I guess, kind of around the Cave Hill area of North Belfast, there's kind of a lot of, I guess, like regeneration and kind of development there. But then the part of North Belfast that I'm in, you do see a lot of economic deprivation. And I think what's really stark about that, and not that, of course you see that everywhere, right? Everywhere has parts of town that are more developed than others. But I think what feels so stark about it in Belfast is that it's so close. As of where I am, I'm, I would say maybe a little more than a mile kind of from the city center, or from like where St. Anne's is.
Yeah.
And so, and even just to go on that walk from where I am to St. Anne's, you go through a really economically deprived area, and it feels very stark because you kind of just see it change so quickly. And then I think the other thing that's kind of frustrating about it is knowing that those parts of towns that are economically deprived also correlate to where, some of the worst, I guess, and most violent kind of conflict was in the Troubles. But then, so to kind of maybe end on a more hopeful note, what's been really wonderful to see as I've been here as well is to see the different kind of community projects that I've been involved with, and just seen develop. So like I was saying just a moment ago, I just talked to someone from the 343, which I think has been around since 2018. So to just see those really community focused and community oriented groups work really, really hard and really work for this place and to make this place more inclusive in a lot of different ways is really encouraging to see.
So are you staying, Leonie, then? Is that what you're saying? You're staying?
We'll see. To be honest, I think I'm probably am going to be moving after the PhD, but it's been like I was saying, it's been, no, just because I kind of I was supposed to be working in Germany. It's a long story, but I was supposed to be working in Germany during the pandemic, and I think I'll be going. Plan is to go back after. But that being said, this place has been a really big, I mean, it's been most of my 20s, and it's been a really big part of my life.
Yeah. Well, this is a good opportunity because we're running out of time, and this is a good opportunity for everybody to sort of end on a positive, hopeful note. And I want to give everybody a chance to make the case to somebody who might be watching, who's sort of having that sort of conversation with themselves at the moment, whether or not they want to stay or whether they want to leave. So Alva, start with you. Should I stay or should I go?
Well, I'll be a hypocrite if I say you should stay, but I'm going to anyway. I mean, as we were saying, like Belfast and I mean Northern Ireland. I mean, I'm from Belfast, so I'm being very Belfast centric about this.
We'll forgive you. I'll forgive you.
I'm in trouble. But Northern Ireland is such a beautiful, welcoming place, and I mean, in a way, if you're from there, you kind of already know, and you know that there's the family pull there already. You already have your roots there, and sometimes it takes going away to appreciate what a great place it is to live and work in. I was able to work from home for a few months during the pandemic, so I got the best of both worlds. I got the benefits of a job in London while being in my parents' living room in Belfast, and just being able to step out of your front door and the air is cleaner and you have all your neighbours from when you were growing up. Everyone's so friendly. You can go and walk over the moors at the weekend. I think it's a really great place to live, and there's so many opportunities there. And the thing is that I suppose for all that there are plenty of people like me who do go away, I still have plenty of friends who are still in Northern Ireland, and it's like Tina was saying, they aren't actually in the public sector, they're all in private sector jobs, and those are jobs that didn't even necessarily exist 10 years ago in Northern Ireland. So there are startups. I have a friend who works for a startup, like there are new opportunities always springing up. And so I think as well as the sort of the sentimental reasons why Northern Ireland is a great place, there are the opportunities there. And I think that lots of people like me, whether they're in Belfast, whether they're in Northern Ireland currently or they're not, I think a lot of people do feel a really deep love for that place. And I suppose like it's just this thing, if you're Northern Irish here in London, I bumped into someone yesterday who was from Belfast, and you just have this instant connection. I think there's such a sort of fierce loyalty to be from here, whether you're sort of orange or green or neither. There's a kind of distinctive Northern Irish identity that is just shaped from being from this small part of the world. And so yeah, I think that it's a really great place to live and to work. And I think there's a real desire there for lots of people who want to contribute to the place where they're from, and there's a real case that they can.
Yeah. Tina, should I stay or should I go? What is your sort of take on it?
My advice is you do whatever you feel like you want to, because at the end of the day in life, it's only, it's about you and it's about your future. It's not about, other people putting pressure on you. Mm-hmm. My view is it's great to get away, to explore, to have an adventure. You do move up in your career. For most people that I know that went away, if they're moving into jobs in London, they can do it for so many years, and you will move up. Just as Alba talking about the New Statesman, that's not something someone here was able to do. She had to go there to do that. So I think your career will flourish if you go away, but only if you're hardworking and only if you're prepared to really push yourself. equally, your career can flourish here too if you're hardworking and you're prepared to push yourself. So go and do whatever you feel like you want to do. And trust me, by the time you have a family, most Northern Irish girls, Irish or British, whatever you want to call yourselves, tend to bring their families back here because it's genuinely a really great place to bring up families. And the economy, for all that we say about economic inactivity, we're way up there for financial services, we're way up there for cybersecurity, we're going to do great things with the green economy. And so there's great things happening, and you can play your part whilst you're here at home. So, but it's important to do what you want. And whether you stay or whether you go, you can be great and have a fantastic life either way, because that's all in your hands.
Absolutely. Charmaine?
I have to agree with Tina as well. And I've put down just a note here about individual responsibility. And, I was from a background of poverty and working class housing estate, and education was my way out of that. And there's such a good education system here in Northern Ireland that I was able to do that, but never forget the roots that I've come from. And I still live in the area where I was reared. So you can do that here in Northern Ireland, and the opportunities are available to you, but it's the individual responsibility of how you want to see your own life progress. And I have traveled internationally, but I've never felt a sense of moving away. I've always felt I'll take that learning and I'll come back again and help my own community and other communities in Northern Ireland. And I suppose working rurally, I've always said it's such a privilege to see how rural people are so connected to the land and the sense of place and the townland that they're from. And, I live in an urban setting, so I'm an urbanite working for rural communities, which is quite strange, but you can just see that connection to the land and how proud they are of where they live and the community that they live. And that's really, really instilled in me even more so how important this island is to people in Northern Ireland. And we can't forget, and the census is coming up very soon in terms of results, it is a multicultural country, whether we like it or not. It is diverse in terms of gender, sexual orientations, BAME communities. I think they're saying in the last census there's like 80,000, there might be 120,000 people in this round. So there are people from other countries coming here to live and rear their families and rear them as British and or Irish citizens as well. So there has to be a reason why other people come here. And I've always said that when I work with them, why do you come here? Why do you want to live here? And it's always because opportunity. So if they can see it, why can't we? If they can live here and be happy living here, then people from Northern Ireland who are Indigenous to here, why can't we? So I'm just a real advocate for here. And I do think a girl called Louise Coyle said last week as well, and we're talking about politics as well. And I loved what you said last week at a women's event. You said, about women getting even engaged at a political level and feeling like our voices aren't heard. And she said, if there's no seat for you at the table, then you bring a chair. And that stuck with me, because I thought that's it. I'll have a folding chair in the boot of my car from now on, just to make sure, that women play a key role here in Northern Ireland as well. We're half the population, so I don't think people should forget that either. And in terms of reconciliation and peace building work, women are the peacemakers and the peace builders, and I think that's another important message that we should get through for us. More stable and secure and safe future. Women have the potential to do that.
Absolutely. And Benny, I suppose rather than ask you, should I stay or should I go, would you be going home to the United States and telling sort of people at home to come to Northern Ireland? Would you be selling Northern Ireland as a place for people to come to?
Yeah, I think sort of I've just been thinking whenever, as everyone else answered their question, just about kind of the reasons I've come back and the reasons I've stayed. And I think, I'm veering off topic from what you asked a little bit, but this past year has been a really interesting one for me because I actually was not supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in Berlin. And so it was sort of this, I was supposed to go and ended up staying situation. And I think that experience has made me really think about and again, as someone that probably is going to go back to Berlin after this, thinking about the things that I do have here that I haven't had elsewhere. And I think where I kind of speaking to someone in the US about it, I would just highlight some of those things, just some very practical things. Like right now I live in a house where I'm able to have a garden. I'm very unlikely to have something like that, you know, when I move elsewhere. And there's a lot to be said for that, and a lot to be said for the community I've built here over the last almost decade now, which is wild. You know, and I think in terms of just thinking about things that I have said to people back home about it, because again, it's not somewhere, especially for people of my generation, it's not somewhere we know anywhere about. We don't grow up learning about Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We don't really grow up hearing about Belfast either. Maybe our parents kind of would have. So I think just explaining, I guess maybe the complexity of the place, and kind of the where there's moments of hope and frustration in that complexity. And you know, I was thinking a little bit as well about the kind of, you know, if you don't, what you just said about you don't have a seat at the table, bring a chair. And I think that is a really important thing to think about. But I also think it's important for people that are kind of in positions of privilege, that maybe are more likely to have a seat at the table, to really actively work to make that space. And I think that's something really important to think about in Northern Ireland as well. And I know we've touched on race a couple of times, but I think, you know, as a white person, it's really important to sort of think about the issues that exist here in regards to race, and how, and in regards to, I know Alba was saying that she wasn't sure if some of her gay friends might want to live here, and, you know, just kind of the issues of inclusivity that exist around those things in this place, and really working hard to change that if we're privileged enough to be in a position where we maybe don't experience those things directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as somebody who couldn't wait to leave Northern Ireland, I mean, I am really grateful to be back. And I mean, like I said, you know, I've seen a lot of change since I returned home. And I mean, I'm hopeful for Northern Ireland's future. And I think that it does lie really in the hands of the younger generations, like I said, who are not affected, or sort of their sort of view of Northern Ireland isn't maybe shaped by the troubles that maybe, you know, some of us did experience when we were growing up. So I think there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of challenges as we have discussed tonight, but it is hopeful. Yeah. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. And I'm sorry that it's come to an end. That was the quickest conversation, really. But thank you to our excellent panelists for giving us their time as we engage in this really constructive and timely conversation. Thank you to Alba Ray, Lainey Lennox, Tina McKenzie, and Charmian Jones. Thank you also to the Imagine Festival for giving us the platform to have this conversation, and we hope that everybody watching is staying safe and well at this time, and hopefully we can have this conversation again next year, and we can do it face to face as well, which would be great. So yeah, thank you so much everybody.